Okay, we're here at the Tiffin Conference in Lethbridge. We're here with Larry Hicks. Larry, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
What I do is I teach and I help livestock producers and packers in U.S. and Canada to identify and manage risk. Not just tell them they have risk, but show them how to. So I put on workshops and I teach them through a conference kind of workshop kind of thing, and then I actually apply it and show it to them. So most of what I do is work with both Canadian and U.S. I've been coming up to Canada since 1983 and working with both the packers and the producers. Back in the 80s, I was one of the primary research gentlemen who helped the analysis for the U.S. or the Canadian fed cattle market to the U.S. with the Canadian dollar, and this allowed packers to offer contracts to producers in Canada and hedge them off. So I've been real involved in the Canada, even though I'm in the U.S., in helping support the Canadian producer and packer in managing risk.
Okay, so can we expect the same kind of volatility over the next 12 to 18 months in the markets? I've
been a broker 35 years managing risk. There's never been a calm moment, so I'm not going to expect one this next year. I think volatility will stay high. And as long as there's volatility, I want to remind people there's two things: risk, but there's also opportunity. And what we forget is we sometimes focus on the risk so much that we miss out on the opportunity. And so what I try to work with people is look, volatility is in the marketplace. There's risk, but let's also look at the opportunities. Let's see how we can capitalize on that.
Okay. So what do you think is going to happen to live cattle futures over the next, say, 12 months? Is the recession going to have any impact?
You got to remember that the futures market, your question specifically talks towards the futures, commodity cattle futures. I'm a believer that the cash predominantly leaves the marketplace. And so the end of all supply and demand is the cash market, and that's where cash market will be. The futures market is an anticipatory market. It perceives what it thinks cash is going to be at some point in time down the road. That's why they call it a futures market. Do I think cash-fed cattle prices will recover? I do. And why do I do it? I think that the news of the recession is primarily in the marketplace. Do we have some tough times ahead? Yes. Has the market discounted it? I think there's a good chance that a lot of it's been discounted in the marketplace. So if we're talking about the futures, we know that we're in a recession. We're not going to get out of it very quickly. And have we seen all the damage? I'm not sure. But what I do know is that there's still retail margin. There's currently packer margin. And the one that doesn't have margin is the producer. And so we need to realign so that retailers, packers, and producers are making money. And right now, the producer is not only losing money, but he's losing a tremendous amount of money in both U.S. and Canada.
So is that the fear as well as the cow-calf? It's both producers?
Yeah. It is. And so I tend to believe that the market's discounted the biggest part of the economic recession and believe that there'll be a recovery. And I think it won't get to the levels we've been before, but it'll get back to where margins will be profitable for the producer in 2009, both U.S. and Canada.
There's been a lot of attention, obviously, in Canada on cool. How is it affecting the American market right now?
Let's put it in perspective of the demand side. I think that's easier because we're more concerned about the Canadian meat, either meat or in a live animal coming in its perception by the U.S. consumer. One of my contacts in the U.S. is a gentleman who actually works between the packer and the HR&I trade. This recession has hurt the HR&I trade. We don't go out and eat at the restaurants as much, but we'll go home and we'll cook that steak and we'll get that hamburger. So I'm not so concerned about the grocery. I'm more concerned about the HR&I trade. Mm-hmm. My question to him was the same about cool. I've always known that he's moved Canadian product before. His answer was, it'll go to a discount. But it depends on the demand. There are a lot of HR&I trade in the U.S. that when you open that menu, does not say USDA choice on it. But it's a product that draws people in, okay? And there's a market for that. Here's where his problem was. His problem is how the Canadians want to sell it. They want to sell the whole load. His challenge is that I only want to buy a certain product, and I don't want the whole load. If I have to buy the whole load and I have to merchandise the rest of that product and keep it in the cooler, I want a bigger discount. So one of the things we have to address is we can't just say, hey, you're going to have to buy my whole load, or I'm not going to sell it to you. Canadians have to be creative. We have to be able to provide that product to them, and the margins will narrow up because there is a demand for it.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Larry. Larry, if somebody wanted to get in contact with you, is there a website they can go to?
There is. It's cattlehedging.com. That's cattlehedging.com. That's cattlehedging.com. And our toll-free number is 866-HEDGE-11. That's 866-433-4311. And one last product I'd just like to introduce to everybody, and that is we are debuting there in 2009 a product called Hedge Positions. It's for the industry and it's for the cattle producer. And its intent is to reconcile your inventory with your derivatives or your risk management tools. And what it does is that your inventory is brought into our server. We now have the software and the data management so that you can see the value of your cattle. And it's set up both for a U.S. producer and a Canadian producer as the dollar affects their value of their inventory. And so this is a product that is available now in 2009, and it will be something that I think that the industry is in need of to help the producer get a grasp on identifying and managing his risk.
So do you find, Larry, that like derivatives, that's probably a word that a lot of producers necessarily aren't used to. Do you find that producers are more and more open to the derivatives and risk management strategies?
Yes, they have been. Then when you had the BSE, there was no correlation to the U.S.
Yeah.
And now we're trying to get it back. I told a lot of people that the U.S. lost a lot more money feeding cattle this last year than the Canadian producer did because the dollar helped the Canadian market out substantially. The U.S. producer lost probably record amount of equity. I tell them that what will happen to the U.S. producer as well as the Canadian producer is that in 2009 they will have religion, meaning that all of a sudden risk management will become an issue. The Canadian producer, the U.S. producer, if they did not manage their risk, they've lost so much equity this last year, it will take years to recover it. You cannot afford to take that risk. The producer has to learn, whether it's U.S. or Canadian, has to learn about derivatives, meaning futures, options, and I've been told, and I can mention it, that the that the Alberta government is coming out with a price insurance, basis insurance about midsummer, and that will be another product that, depending on the premiums and stuff, that they can use that would be considered a derivative to manage risk.
Okay, Larry, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.